Greetings, my delightful biology class. So glad to be here to show you some amazing stuff today. I've got a fascinating lecture. We're in Module 16. This is what I'm calling 16B, and it's all about birds. And I find birds to be utterly fascinating, and that's why I wanted to spend a whole week on them. All right, so here we go on this fascinating journey. First of all, we're going to see our little guy. Hold on. See our little guy come flying in right here. There he is. All right. One of the really cool things about birds is many of them have the ability to fly. So we'll look at some of the physics of that and how they're able to figure that out. Pretty cool stuff. Okay. First of all, we got to fill in some blanks. All right. So open up your book. Not sure what page, but it is Module 16. It might be in Part A. It might be in Part B. Not exactly sure. Sorry about that. So aves is referring to birds. So class aves, and here are the characteristics we have of it. By the way, plural of that is avis. So avis would be a bird. First of all, they're endothermic. Do you remember what that means? It means they're warm-blooded. They are able to keep a constant body temperature no matter what the environment is. Sort of like us. They have a four-chambered heart, also sort of like us. They have a toothless bill. There are some exceptions to this. There are some birds out there who do have ridges. Even ducks have sort of ridges on their bills. And there are some that have what appear to be actual teeth, but they're unusual, out of the ordinary. They're oviparous. They lay eggs. You probably knew that. They are amniotic eggs, similar to what we saw with the reptiles, but these are covered with calcium carbonate. And that is a chemical that, of course, hardens. And so, therefore, the eggs are hard, unlike the reptiles. They're covered with feathers. That is a definition of a bird, that they have feathers. And, of course, they have a backbone, so that's part of it, too. And they have porous, lightweight bones. There are also some exceptions on this. Some of our flightless birds that we'll be talking about in this lecture do have dense bones. All right, they're the ones that don't fly. Notice how flight is not part of the characteristics. That's because there's a good portion of bird out there that does not fly. All right, they're flightless birds, and we will get to those in time. So the general morphology of a bird, so the shape of it, is generally like this. Of course, we have some really crazy looking birds out there that don't look just like this, but in general, we'll look at this as probably a sparrow or something. And notice all birds, have heads and eyes and mouths, this kind of thing. We have a beak, right? So our upper and lower beak. The beak is typically hard, like teeth. And so it's able to eat certain things. We'll look at different beaks and see what, by just looking at the beak, we can decide what the critter must eat. And then notice they are standing on two legs, right here. And that they have a large breast muscle. And they have their wings. And these tail feathers are just feathers. So their body ends right here at the rump, and then past those feathers are sticking past that. Inside the bird, we'll see this kind of thing. We're going to do today what I would have done for a lab for us is I have a pigeon that's preserved, and I would have tried to dissect it. I will tell you that it is actually pretty difficult to dissect a bird, mostly because that breast tissue is so thick. I mean, so think about when you're eating, chicken breast. It's very thick. And so typically I would approach it from the side and try to get to all the parts and show them to you there. But today what we're going to do instead is a virtual dissection, mostly looking at the digestive system. So we'll look here. It's really very fascinating. The buccal or buccal cavity, the food comes in here, it goes down into the esophagus and into the crop, and then into the stomach, which is kind of here, and then to the gizzard, and then to the intestines and out. Okay, so while we won't be looking at, we'll be mostly keying in on the heart, the digestive system, and the reproductive system. And we'll cover those kind of in separate little deals like that. So their interior anatomy is similar to a mammal, right? Because there's a heart and a lung. All right, so here's our lung, and our heart is down here. Okay, and it's a four-chambered heart. Notice there's a liver, there's also a pancreas and all that kind of stuff. Really the big difference between what we're going to look at mammals next week and birds is that digestive system. That's why we're going to key in on that. And of course how they make eggs. All right, the four-chambered heart, here we go. We have the two upper chambers, which are called the atria. So the left atrium is on, let's see, this side, and the right atrium, and the ventricles. So the right ventricle and the left ventricle. Okay. Notice that the left ventricle right here, notice this would be left from the chicken's perspective, right? It's on the right for us, yeah. Notice this is a thicker wall on this side than this is on this side, and the reason is because the left ventricle is what does the pumping of the blood to the rest of the body. This ventricle only has to pump to the lungs, so it doesn't have to go very far. In 2 weeks, we're going to do a little preview of human anatomy, and I'll explain all about the circulatory system and how that works. Right now, just know what you need to know is that birds have 4-chambered hearts. They have an amniotic egg, similar to the reptiles. Here we can see they are oviparous. They have a hard shell with calcium, we know that. And as they, if it is fertilized, so if the, here's the called the germinal disc, right here. If that gets fertilized by a rooster, then it will start to form in this manner. So after 18 hours, the brain will be formed. The 21st hour, the digestive system will be finished. Then comes the circulatory system. At hour 38, the heart is already beating. In 56 hours, we have all this developing stuff: ears, eyes, lungs, kidneys. And by 96 hours, the formation is complete, and they have about a 21-day gestation. We are talking about chicks here. Chicks are a special type of offspring, which are called precocial. We're going to see there are other birds that don't give birth to precocial eggs, and I'll explain to you what all that means. All right, I'm not sure if you were supposed to write all this down. If you were, then you can pause this and write this down. If not, it's just information that's interesting to know, that how quickly they develop. Now, keep in mind, this is after the egg has been laid. Okay, the egg's already been laid. The stuff to get it, the egg going, made inside the body is fascinating, and we're going to watch it right here. Okay, this fascinates me.
In a hen, an ovary and an oviduct make up the reproductive system that creates an egg. The yolk grows in the ovary, and the rest of the egg forms around the yolk as it passes through the oviduct. Most females have 2 ovaries, but birds are unusual and have only 1. A hen's ovary rests against the back body wall, just to the left of the spinal column. The oviduct begins at the ovary, folds back and forth upon itself, and leaves the hen's body through the vent, just below the tail. The ovary and the oviduct occupy a surprisingly small space within the body of the hen, only a few cubic inches. But when the oviduct is stretched out, it's nearly 2 feet long and has 5 distinct sections: the infundibulum, the magnum, the isthmus, the shell gland, and the vagina. When a hen is actively laying, nutrients from the food she eats are converted into the building blocks of egg yolk. These building blocks, 1/3 protein, 1/3 fat, and 1/3 water, are then carried by the bloodstream from the liver to the ovary. In the ovary, tiny tissue bags called follicles fill with yolk and grow. The largest follicle on the ovary will release the yolk of the egg the hen will lay tomorrow, while the next largest will produce the next day's yolk, and the next largest will yield the next day's yolk, and so on. In 1 to 2 weeks, a follicle grows from less than 1 millimeter in diameter to the mature size of 25 millimeters. When a yolk matures, the follicle ruptures along a line relatively free from blood vessels, the stigma, and the yolk is released. If any blood vessels cross the stigma, a drop of blood may spot the yolk as it is released from the follicle. Called the infundibulum, the funnel-shaped upper end of the oviduct envelops the ovary and catches the most mature follicle as it reaches maturation and ovulates. Then the yolk embarks on a 24-hour journey down the oviduct. When the yolk emerges from the follicle and moves into the upper part of the infundibulum, it's the only time in its progress when it is not covered by a layer of albumin. Fertilization, if it is to occur, will take place here. Some bacterial pathogens, such as Salmonella enteritidis, are able to colonize the reproductive tracts of infected hens. If these bacteria become associated with the developing egg as it passes along the tract, and before it is surrounded by a shell, they can cause disease in a human consumer of the contaminated yolk or albumin. The yolk spends about 15 minutes in the infundibulum before it passes into the magnum. In the magnum, over a period of about 3 hours, it will be covered by a dense, shock-absorbing layer of albumin, or egg white. As the albumin forms around the yolk, spiral ridges which run the length of the magnum cause the yolk to spin like a bullet in a rifle barrel. This spinning twists the protein fibers in the albumin just in front of and just behind the yolk, and makes two pigtail-like structures called the chalaza. The chalaza keep the yolk suspended in the center of the albumin, and ultimately prevent it from moving around inside the egg. The magnum gives way to the next section of the oviduct, the isthmus. Here, the shell membranes are deposited. These thin layers of protein wrap loosely around the albumin covering the yolk. It is as though the yolk and its layer of albumin are a blob of jello, wrapped with two sheets of cellophane. The process does not result in a smooth, egg-shaped structure. In fact, an egg leaving the isthmus probably looks more like a prune than a plum. The partially formed egg then enters the shell gland. Here, over the next 20 hours, the shell will form. First, a thin albumin is secreted. This thin albumin is mostly water, and it moves by osmosis through the two shell membranes into the highly concentrated thick albumin surrounding the yolk. This plumps the egg into a normal shape and stretches the shell membranes tight around it. Next, a highly concentrated solution of calcium carbonate is secreted by the shell gland, and crystals of calcite form and grow on the outer shell membrane. As the crystals expand, they grow into one another to form a solid shell. Very tiny spaces left in between the crystals leave pores in the shell. Lastly, a special protein solution, called the cuticle, is deposited onto the eggshell. Gas can pass through the proteinaceous cuticle and through the pores in the shell, but the two layers protect the egg from harmful bacteria. Finally, in a process called oviposition, the egg flips end over end. This occurs through contractions of the uterus, synchronized with relaxation of the muscular vagina, and pushes the egg out of the hen's body. An important part of the egg does not form until after it is laid. When an egg is laid, it fills the shell. However, a hen's body temperature is 106 degrees Fahrenheit, and eggs are generally laid into environments that are 20 to 40 degrees cooler. As the egg cools, the inner portion contracts and forms an air cell between the two shell membranes. A chick would puncture and breathe through the air in this cell before hatching. The fully formed egg now begins another journey. If it has been fertilized, it will go to a hatchery. If not, it will go to one of two places: an egg processing and packaging plant for distribution to grocery stores, or to an egg breaking plant where, once processed, the egg will be included in one of countless food products such as mayonnaise, cake mixes, or salad dressing.
Okay, wow. I just find that crazy fascinating. Am I alone out here? I just think that is amazing that that chicken is just doing that every day. That's crazy stuff. Now, it's interesting because we're talking about the reproductive system, but that was just the egg, right? So it turns out that really the development of the embryo inside the egg does not happen until after it's laid. Okay, so therefore what we just saw was the laying of an egg. I could have said that was a fertilized egg or a non-fertilized egg. Okay, so but if it were fertilized, then we would see the progression of the development of the embryo inside the egg after it is laid. I think that's also fascinating that that all happens. This is a schematic picture showing kind of the steps of the formation of everything. And it's, of course, obviously drawn, but we do have some pictures of this. So these have been, cracked open in the midst so we could see this. So for science right there. And you can see the developing embryo right there. Okay, notice all those little blood vessels. We're going to see what those are for here in a minute. Here, day 10, look, you can see eyes and a beak right there and those little legs coming off, right? Yeah, so pretty cool. I do have a video, and I believe it's of this. Let's see. Yes. There you go. Pretty cool. And then this is going to show them hatching out real quick. Some of you have hatched eggs before. It takes patience, right? And so you have to actually turn them and things like this to keep them healthy when you're doing that. It's really the best for the mama to take care of them naturally out there. There are lots of different kinds of eggs, which brings up an important truth I need to tell you, and that is if you find an egg out in nature in a nest or anything like this, don't touch it. Okay, even if it's cracked open, the egg is cracked open and you just want to collect that shell or that nest, don't do it. And the reason I tell you that is because there's a federal law that tells you not to touch any wild animal, any wild bird part. You cannot pick up, you can't legally pick up a wild bird feather. I don't know if you knew that, but you can't. I would have brought to y'all today some nests that have been collected for me by people who did not know that. I am It's legal for me to have them as an educator, but it's not legal for you to have them. But you can see the different colors we have here. They're mostly egg-shaped. Some are rounder than others. There are some that are really tapered. There's this particular bird that lives on a cliff, and it has a very elongated egg, so that if it starts to roll, it'll only roll in a circle and therefore not off the cliff. The largest egg out there, of course, is the ostrich egg. I don't have an ostrich egg. I borrowed one from a friend in the past, but one of these days I'll get one and I would have brought it to show you. All right, I explained to you how the chick, when it gets born, is a special kind of offspring called precocial. It's like the word precocious, to be ready to go and move around and very energetic. Well, this kind of bird right here is called altricial. And altricial means that it requires a lot of, it's very dependent on mama at the beginning. So a lot of care is required. Notice it doesn't really have any feathers yet. And you've seen these little, the guys in the nests. Typically the ones that are in nests are altricial. That's why they have a nest, so that mama can come back and take care of them. Any kind of motion that they feel, like if you bump the tree or even a heavy wind bumps the tree, that'll cause these little birds to reflexively just open up their mouths like that and say, feed me, mama, feed me. They can make little noises and stuff. And mama comes and feeds them, usually protein to start with. That would be worms and things like this. That would give them the amount of protein they need to grow their feathers and to grow the rest of them, so they develop even more fully outside the egg. Their gestational period inside the egg is probably shorter, is my guess, that they don't stay in there as long as the chick does. The chick has to do a little more developing because it, of course, will be ready to go, start eating. It doesn't even need mama at all. It may not even ever know mama, okay? But these guys do. There's our precocial guys right there. They're ready to go eat their own food. They just have their instinct ready to go. All right, feathers. All birds have feathers. I would have brought several feathers for y'all to take a look at today. You would have looked at them under the microscope because they're pretty cool. Flighted birds have a type of feather called a contour feather, and that's what we're looking down here. The red thing is a contour feather. I don't know if it's really red. That may have been colored by someone. If you go to Hobby Lobby, when it opens up again, you'll find feathers for sale. Some of them are natural. Some of them have colors to them. They've been dyed that color because people like to use them in art projects and things. All right, there's two basic parts here. It's possible that you have to draw this in your book. Can't remember. All right, but it has the shaft, which is the hard part right here, which is also known as the rachis or the quill, like a quill pen, for instance. They would have ink right down here. And then we have the vein. That's the feathery part coming off here like this. The vein has these specialized tissue right here that are called barbs and barbules. What they do, they're like little hooks, and what they will hook onto the other side of it. Okay, so it's almost like zipping along there. It's almost like Velcro, where the little hook comes down, maybe not quite as strong as Velcro, but if you've probably played with a feather and you can rip it apart, you kind of hear it go zip, kind of an unzipping situation right there. And we would have looked at it on the microscope and you would have seen it. Something kind of like this. I've had trouble finding a good picture of barbs and barbules. But here we have, so the barbule has that hook to it, you see, and that hook will hook across. Actually, it hooks across one of these guys right down here, okay? So when you unzip it, those hooks come off, like you undo Velcro, and then when you smooth it along, those hooks will hook back on. And what that does is it gives that feather some structure and strength, which will allow for the fascinating, ability of flight. Okay, so flightless birds don't have contour feathers. They have feathers called downy feathers. Do I have a picture? Yes. So here's our contour feather here, and this is our downy feather, or down, right here. Now notice at the end of the contour there are some here that don't have barbules. That's called downy, or down right there as well. You've probably heard of the word down if you have a down pillow. A down pillow is a pillow stuffed with a bunch of downy feathers. How about that? You may have noticed every now and then a feather comes out, right? And it does have a little point right here on the shaft, which you can sometimes feel. Sometimes they'll poke through that pillow, right? They're very sought after. Some people actually have, bed cover thing. When I was in Germany, the whole bed cover, I'm talking about like your blanket you would pull up, was down, a down blanket. That's because it's cold in Germany, I suppose. All right, so the contour feather is for flight, however. The downy feather is for insulation, warmth, keeping them warm, that kind of thing. So, like the eggs, we have feathers in all sorts of colors and shapes and sizes. You can see some of these are amazingly long, and I will say you will find some of these at Hobby Lobby because people love to use feathers for crafts. Some people use them for fashion, hats and things like this. Look at that. Wow. Beautiful rooster, all those different colors. Remember, those tail feathers are just feathers coming off because his body ends about right there. So those colors right there are obviously showing his breed, but also for to impress the females. And so that is definitely our rooster. Okay, let's talk about flight here. So now we're looking at flighted birds, so therefore we're looking at contour feathers. And we have these ones called the primary feathers right here, all contour right there, okay? Then our secondary, also contour. And then all of these here covering like little layers right there. And we'll talk specifically about this little fastening here called the alula in just a minute. Okay, so what happens is these feathers are in a particular shape when the bird stretches its wing out, okay? And that shape is sort of like a curve. For the longest time, human beings wanted to mimic flight of birds, and they thought the flapping was the big deal that made them fly. But it turns out that the flapping is just getting them started, getting them up there and going, right? But it's really the shape of the wing that allows for flight. And there's something known as Bernoulli's principle, where the air underneath the wing will have to travel shorter distance than the air above the wing that has to go farther, which creates lift, and therefore you can have flight. And finally, we designed airplanes with their wings like that. Quick interesting story here. When I was working at the vet clinic, people would bring their birds in. Now, birds as a pet are kind of expensive, and therefore you don't want your bird just flying away, out of the window, right? And so people would bring their birds in, and they would ask us to clip their wings. Because if you take enough feathers off their wing, then they won't be able to fly anymore, okay? But you don't want to, be cruel or anything and pluck them out. That would hurt, like pulling hair out of your head. But you can cut them. So what we would do is we would leave these first 4 primary feathers here, and this next group right here, we would take scissors, literally scissors, and just cut right along there. Now what this did was that kept them from flying, so they weren't able to fly. They could fly little tiny distances, like they could jump up and flop across the room, kind of thing, like a roadrunner. But it wouldn't. They wouldn't be able to fly. And furthermore, when they closed their wings on their back, these covered it, and it didn't look bad. It didn't. You couldn't really tell that those feathers. They get covered up when the feathers are against their body, and so therefore they still looked good, but yet couldn't fly. All right, and it was really for the safety of the bird too. They're domestic animals. They don't need to be out in the wild. So here we are. I could have showed you here. So there's our primaries. We would have cut this right along here with some scissors. We don't need to worry about these guys so much. Sometimes we would accidentally maybe cut in there. And that would be like getting a haircut. Okay, so it doesn't hurt them at all. Okay, I wanted to mention this right here. When man was learning how to make airplanes and how to fly, the biggest problem they encountered was this turbulence. Especially, when they were trying to take off and when they're trying to land, when they're close to the ground. And so they would have this turbulence. They started really studying birds when they finally understood it was the wing shape that was so important. They studied birds and they realized when a bird is taking off and landing, it stretches out these little feathers here called the alula, stretches them out, and that actually breaks that turbulence. And so once we figured that out, we designed wings with that little thing on there, which I'll show you in a minute. Okay. They have strong muscles. Remember we talked about how the chicken breast is so meaty. Well, they have that breast muscle in there because that is what supports the flight. All right, so the strong muscles will create the musculature to flap the wings to get started on that. Okay, and here we have the alula reducing turbulence. See how the wind is going to come over the top. This is the shape of the wing now, and it has to travel farther here. And since it's going a shorter amount here, it actually causes lift underneath the wing like that. That's known as Bernoulli's principle. And then notice we have all different kinds of birds that have slightly different shapes of their wings. The albatross we'll look at in some real specific detail here in just a little bit right there. And so we can see they're soaring or high up, high lift, high speed. This one's going to be fast. The elliptical wing's going to be really fast as well. Okay. So there we go. Yeah, so the wind. Now notice that right there. See, on this is like a wing on an airplane now. we put that little deal on here to mimic the alula, which is going to break some of that and actually lift that air a little bit more. So climbing, that's when that would be the turbulence right there, right over the top like that. So fascinating stuff. If you observe enough in nature, you're going to figure stuff out. That's what scientists do. And there it is again. This is the alula acting area right here. And then notice that flap right there will extend the curve of the airplane wing. Next time you're on an airplane, check that out. When it's time to take off, you'll see the pilot doing those little flaps, moving those little flaps up and down to extend the wings. Okay. Bird bones, in order for them to fly, they need to not be super heavy, right? And so one of the ways they accommodate that is to have these, hollow bones. Now, they just have a lot of air sacs in there. They have cross sections because bones need to be strong, right? So they have these little things called struts that are going through here like this. Now, remember, their bones right up here have the marrow in them that are helping produce blood cells and things like that, just like our bones. But then they have that strength without a whole lot of density to them. We also mimic that. Look at here. Here's somebody's small airplane. Notice they have all those struts in there. Yeah. So that's so they're going to cover that, of course, so that this wing is solid right there, but that will give this little plane lightweight. It'll be lightweight, but still have a lot of room for the air to lift there. Here's that bone structure. The breastbone right here is very large. You probably know that from having eaten chicken before. And there's, breast muscle all around there. So it allows that wing to be lifted up and give them that thrust to get up in the first place. All right, songbirds. Birds make beautiful noises. They're really pretty cool. They have an amazing ability. The bird song will attract a mate typically. Each bird has its own unique song. We do know that the Texas state bird is called the mockingbird. They'll mock other birds' songs. But for the most part, birds will attract birds of their same type by singing a particular song. If you know somebody who's a birder who likes birds, they'll listen to something out there in nature. They'll say, oh, there goes a such and such bird. They'll know it. They'll know exactly what it is. I'm not one of those people. I appreciate bird songs. I really do. The spring, we've had them outside here. Sometimes they're really loud. Let's take a listen to this one right here. But I can't tell you what it is. I'm not sure. Beautiful, peaceful. Okay. Now, this guy right here, the lyrebird, oh my goodness, what a fascinating bird sounds he makes. Let's take a listen to his.
What bird has the most elaborate, the most complex, the most beautiful song in the world? Well, I guess there are lots of contenders, but this bird must be one of them. The superb lyrebird of Southern Australia.
He clears a space in the forest to serve as his concert platform. To persuade females to come close and admire his plumes, he sings the most complex song he can manage, and he does that by copying the songs of all the other birds he hears around him, such as the kookaburra. It's a very convincing impersonation. Even the original is fooled. He can imitate the calls of at least 20 different species. He also, in his attempt to outsing his rivals, incorporates other sounds that he hears in the forest. That was a camera shutter. And again. And now a camera with a motor drive. And that's a car alarm. And now the sounds of foresters and their chainsaws working nearby.
I find that fascinating. Amazing. It almost looked like it was fake, like they added those in. Okay, so taking a look at bird beaks, you can just look at any bird's mouth and figure out probably what they eat right here. So we have our flat duckbill. It's going to eat grasses. It pulls them in. Has those little ridges like I told you about. The gull right here has a little sharp beak right here. Gulls, of course, have adapted somewhat. They'll eat lots of things like Cheetos and things you throw up to them, right? But they really want little fish. And so they're for that. Eagle has a very sharp beak. It's going to pick up small mammals typically and eat those. Crossbill, I'm not sure what this guy eats. It almost looks like he can't eat much with that crossbill right there. Parrot's going to have a sharp beak to crack things, usually like fruits that need peeling and this kind of thing, and then maybe some big nuts. Woodpecker, notice it's got the long beak that's going to reach into a tree that has bugs living in it, and so it hits its head against there and drills a little hole and then gets the bug out right there. They have a pretty fascinating deal. Their tongue kind of winds around in their head, and then they have all these air spaces in their head so that when they're beating their head against the tree, it doesn't hurt them. The avocet, also a long one to reach down into little holes in the sand to pick up bugs. Nighthawk here has a beak for cracking seeds. The flamingo has I think we're going to look at this one specifically in just a minute. It has a little sieve in there, which is pretty cool. The kiwi, a long beak, going to reach down and get some little critters. Spoonbill is going to scoop up some water, like the pelican also is going to scoop up some water. And as that water filters out, the fish stay in that they're picking up. And here probably some smaller things, little shrimp and things like that. Also, by looking at birds' feet, you can figure out where they live. So I'm not sure what the coot is doing here. It's sort of a semi-webbed foot. But the duck, we know the webbed foot is because they're going to swim, right? That allows them to swim. The hawk has talons that are going to be able to pick up prey and also perch. The woodpecker has the fore going like this, so it can actually claw itself on to the side of a tree and hold on very tightly while it's smacking its head into it. The grouse, look, it almost looks furry right here. Not sure what the grouse does. The crow is going to perch on a branch. It's kind of cool. You may wonder how a bird, when they're perched on a tree and they're sleeping, they can actually lock those little joints into place. So they can perch on there and lock, and they can fall asleep and no problem. They just have to unlock them the next day. And parrot does the same thing right here. Look at our ostrich foot, big giant foot. So they can have a lot of surface area to plant their heavy bodies on the ground. I'm not sure what a jacana is right there. Male versus female, you can see some difference in coloring here. Everybody knows, here we're looking at some cardinals, that this is the male cardinal. He is much flashier than the female. The female's a lot more dull and going to blend into the environment because guess what she's taking care of? The eggs in the nest. That'll keep predators from seeing her as easily. Meanwhile, why is he so red? God has made that for this beautiful bird. It's really to attract the female, but it's also for our pleasure, our enjoyment, right? It's just beautiful. Notice that beak. What do you think they eat? Probably sharp there, eating some seeds and things like that that they have to break open. Oh, look at the classic male versus female. Here is the peacock and the peahen right here. And the peacock, boy, he is impressive right there. He'll raise up those tail feathers and shake them, and it sounds like a rattle going off. It's so loud, and it shakes them, and it attracts the female so that they can have a mating time. All right, we're going to be looking at the major orders of the class Aves here. On page 514 is a chart, table 16.1, and this is going to name what these guys are. So we're going to start with this one. It's called the Anseriformes group, the Anseriformes order, and that's going to include swans. Beautiful. Look at those little babies behind there. We have ducks. Oh, I'm sorry, that's a goose. That's a goose. So we have swans and geese, and of course ducks. All right, looks like a little mallard right there. So look at their beaks, right? Their beaks are going to be for the flat for getting those marshy plants and things. Look at that beautiful duck. It almost looks like it's not real. Just the feathers are fascinating to me. Beautiful, beautiful. All right, our next group right here are called the Apodiformes or Apodiformes. This includes the hummingbirds. These guys are starting to come out. You may have noticed a few out there. I think I may have mentioned this to you before, that bees don't see the color red, so we really kind of rely on the hummingbird to pollinate our red flowers. And notice if you put out some sugar water for them, you usually color it red because they really prefer red. There's also another, do I have it in here? Yeah, this is called a swift. That's part of this group right here. Cute little bird right there. A swift. All right, our next group is called the Ceratiformes. And this includes this guy right here is called a plover or plover. Notice it's on the beach. We have a beach bird here. These are all, I believe, beach birds. Here's our seagull. And that, because that big beak right there, notice that they almost become domesticated, that they hang around the beaches and pick up trash and things like that. But they like fish. And this is called a tern, T-E-R-N, a tern. Beautiful seabird right there. You can see he's going to go after some fish and maybe some digging a little bit. Maybe even things like clams and stuff like that. All right, our next group right here is called the Siconiformes, and it includes the heron. Okay, so notice those long, long legs. So you know what he's going to be doing. He's going to be wading in the water, and look at that beak. He's going to go fishing. There's another one. I believe this is still a heron right there, a different kind of a heron. Around here, actually, in Central Texas, we do have blue herons. You may have seen some of those. They hang around ponds and things like that. But you'll see a bunch of them, of course, as beach birds. Our next group is called the Columbiformes, and that includes pigeons. So here's a pigeon. Pigeons are actually quite beautiful birds. Once again, sort of domesticated. If, for instance, at the University of Texas on campus, I would sit outside on a bench and eat lunch, and I would be surrounded by these guys, all waiting for me to give them a little tidbit of my lunch. They also like Cheetos, by the way. But they're very pretty. Some of them were, if you eat them, they're called squab. So they were actually sort of a delicacy at some point in time. I don't know that we really eat them like the ones that are on campus anymore. They just all live out there. Here's another one. Look how beautiful. Notice the feathers on the feet of this one. They're just sticking off those feathers like that. But beautiful. That is another kind of a pigeon right there. Here as well. That's a very fancy one. Looks like a fur coat around him. That's his feathers coming up. A bunch of different kinds. Here's also a big feather show off here. But this group also includes these guys. This is the dove. We have these around here as well. This is the mourning dove right here. Beautiful. They are always in pairs. They mate for life. I know we have them around here, this mating pair of mourning doves. And they're called mourning doves because they kind of say that coo, coo, like they're sad, you know, that kind of thing. So mourning, not as in A-M in the morning, but mourning as in I'm sad. M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G. Here's another one here, a different kind of a dove right here. I will confess that I do like dove meat. Yeah. Once a year there's dove season, and my brother-in-law goes and prepares dove for us, and I really like those. All right, our next group, Falconiformes. You hear the word falcon in the front of there. This isn't going to include falcons, but first we're going to look at these guys. Here's our eagle. Check out those spread out wings. See, he's gliding at this point in time. So he flapped his wings to get up into the air, and now he's stretching them out. And look at his feet are tucked under him, and he's got some good flight because of the shape of those wings. He's spread out those primary feathers out there, and it's given him some good lift. All right, so that, of course, is a bald eagle. It's part of this group. This is a hawk. We have hawks around here, right? Yeah, you got to be careful with those guys. Don't touch them, right? Don't hunt them, please. Against the law. And then we have the falcons, Falconiformes, right? So they're a little smaller. Some people would raise falcons, and you can send them out and they'll come back to you. They have the ones with the little hoods on and all that kind of stuff. Pretty cool. All right, our next group right here is the Galliformes. The Galliformes will include this guy. This is, Thanksgiving dinner, right? There we go, our turkeys. And our quail. Look at that little thing on the top of his head, little feather up there. Pretty cute. They're good eating too, I guess. I don't know if I've had quail. Oh, and pheasants. Pheasants are also considered a very delicacy of dinner right there. But look at those beautiful feathers. Lovely. All right, our next group are the pelicaniformes, which obviously includes the pelicans right there. So look at that guy. He's got very good webbed feet, so he's going to swim. He's a swimmer. And that fantastic beak right here, you can see. So one thing I want to tell you about these guys is that, so that beak stretches, right? So when they get water in there, that'll stretch out, and the fish will be stuck in there, and they'll kind of squeeze the water out of the beak right here, and the fish will stay in, and they can just swallow them, right? But they have this really interesting formation in their chest right here, where their breastbone is. They have extra little air bags there, so that when they're flying down into the water and they're diving down hard into the water to catch those fish and they slam against the water, well, that extra airbag in the front there actually protects them from hurting themselves because they are going full force down into the water. All right, our next group right here is going to be our Phoeniceoptiformes, which includes flamingos. Look at that beautiful bird. I'm sure you already know this. First of all, he's got those long wading legs. They live in the water. But they're pink because of the food they eat. They eat a type of shrimp, and that shrimp confers that pink into their color. If they do not get fed those shrimp, for instance, if they put in a zoo and the zoo feeds them something besides those shrimp, they'll turn white. Yeah, that pink is definitely from their diet. But this is their beak. Okay, I'm going to go back here. So see their beak right there? So this guy is fixing to put his head in the water, and what he'll do when he's going to eat, he's going to scoop up. His head will be upside down, so his beak will be upside down, and that's what we're looking at here, okay? So he'll scoop up the water. Some of the water will come out of that nostril right there, and then they have this tongue, a very strong tongue, and see those kind of ridges right there? They squeeze the mud and stuff out and keep the shrimp in there. So a very specific type of design on that beak right there. All right, our next group right here are called the Procalciformes. This is including this guy right here, which is called an albatross. Albatross are massive birds. I believe the biggest flighted bird that we have is an albatross. There it is in flight. Their wingspan can be up to 12 feet, y'all. I mean, 12 feet wingspans. And we're going to watch a little bit. There's also a group in there called the petrel. I don't know if I don't have a picture of them. Let's check out this really cool albatross video.
Each summer, on tiny Midway Atoll, young laysan and black-footed albatrosses are abandoned by their parents. It's time to learn to fly. The young birds are at that awkward teenage stage, with hairdos to match. Instinct and an empty stomach draw them out to the beach, where they see the sea for the first time and test their wings. The first walk to the water's edge can be uncertain, and some turn back to think it over and practice a little more. Thousands of birds come to the sea's edge, ready to try. Maybe. When they enter the water, they often take a drink, their first taste of the sea. Some float out over the waves. Others run. Once they're in, they often drift a while, wings up, and run in again, not ready. But soon they're running across the surface of the sea, trying to fly. Franz crouched among the birds to photograph them. Just inside the outer reef, the birds took to the air. And outside, on the open sea, Adults flew with the grace the young birds will soon have.
Thank you.
It won't be long. Within weeks, every young albatross will head to sea and become a real bird.
All right, learning to fly, very fun. All right, our next group right here, we are looking at the pseudoformes. Okay, pseudoformes. These would be the parrots right here. Parrots are popular pets, right? These are the guys we would typically have their wings clipped. Look at all those colors, beautiful colors. And they have a beak that is suitable for eating fruits and some nuts. They can crack some of them. This also would be the parakeet. All right, that's another one that's a popular pet. My favorite, however, are these guys, the lovebirds. They always come in a pair because they mate for life, and they're just beautiful birds. I had a pair of lovebirds at one point. Someone had given them to me as a gift, and they were so loud. I mean, we had them in a cage in the house, and they were so loud we could hardly have a conversation without. They always wanted to join in, but if you covered them up, they got really quiet. So we would put a cover over it a lot. Yeah, finally I found a better home for them. Okay, our next group right here. This is going to be our strigiformes, the owls. Look at that stare, beautiful. We'll talk more about owls next week when we talk about mammals, because owls eat mammals. Look at that beautiful one right there. Just the lovely feathers. And how cute is that? Baby owlet, right? The owlet. All right, our next group right here. This is the pheniciformes. Pheniciformes, also the penguins, right? So penguins are flightless birds. They do not have hollow bones. I had a student who bugged me for a long time to figure out, do they have hollow bones? And I finally found out for sure they do not. They're very dense, in fact. Their feathers are short and they're close to their body. It's almost kind of like fur, but they are feathers. And of course, they use their wings as flippers for swimming. All right, so they're very advanced swimmers. This is fun. Check this out, how they get out of the water. I think they just jump right out. Oh, too much fun. All right, I don't know if this is our last group, our Struthiformes, Struthioniformes, and that would include our ostriches right there. So the largest of the birds, all right, of the living birds. There is a extinct bird called the moa that was like a giant ostrich, but they're extinct. So these are the largest birds we know of. They lay the largest egg. There's one staring at us, okay, right into our face. This would also include the emus. Look at this. These birds are so big, people race them. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it, but I'm guessing these guys have to be pretty small to not damage those poor critters. Okay, there we go. So that's our main groups. I feel like I missed one of them. Yeah. Passeriformes, the robins, finches, sparrows, and nightingales. Sorry about that. All right, so what we would do here, let me skip forward real quick, is I'm going to go to this real quick. I would have brought to you chicken hearts. You can actually buy chicken hearts at the grocery store. People eat them. And I would have had you cut those open to find those 4 chambers. Oops, hold on. I meant to do that. Okay. And you could actually see those chambers in there, the ventricles and the atria. Although when they harvest them, they sometimes cut the tops of them off. But you can see a vessel right there. That would be an aorta. So y'all would be cutting those open and see it. So since we don't have that, we're going to use this. And remember, I told you this is going to key in on the digestive tract. So take a look.
The gastrointestinal tract of an avian is unique in comparison to those of mammals. It contains an intestinal tract that is shorter than that of mammals. The digestive tract begins with the mouth. Chickens don't have teeth or jaw muscles. Instead, they use a lightweight beak to swallow food particles whole. These particles are later broken down by the ventriculus or the gizzard, which is located within the body cavity. The upper beak is covered in hard keratin. Next is the tongue, which is used for collecting, moving, and swallowing food. The tongue, which is covered in lateral barbs, is used to brush food to the back. Salivary glands are less developed in birds, but are present at the roof of the mouth. They secrete mucus, which lubricates the food and allows it to move down the esophagus. Taste buds are located in the upper beak and are also in small numbers on the anterior of the tongue. Chickens have up to 300 taste buds. Behind the tongue is the laryngeal mound that contains a narrow slit that opens into the glottis of the larynx. Its function is to aid in moving food toward the esophagus during swallowing. The esophagus of a chicken is a thin-walled, expansive tube that transports food from the mouth of the pharynx to the stomach. As food is moved towards the back of the tongue, the choana reflexively closes. In the pharyngeal phase, the infundibular mound and glottis close. The tongue is moved backward, and the esophagus is moved forward, decreasing the distance between the oral cavity and the esophagus. The avian esophagus allows birds to swallow their food whole. Its walls are made up of 4 layers: mucosal, submucosal, muscle tunic, and the serosal layer, which contains only smooth muscle cells. In addition, the esophagus is divided into 2 sections: the cervical, near the beak, and the thoracic region, near the crop. The esophagus is lined with epithelium tissue, which contains mucus glands. These glands are more numerous in the thoracic esophagus while being absent in the cervical region. Food is moved through the esophagus via the excitement of the myenteric plexus nerve rather than the muscles. In the chicken digestive system, the crop is an extension of the esophagus. It's a thin-walled pouch at the base of the thoracic section of the esophagus. The walls and lining of the crop are made up of the same 4 layers as the esophagus: the mucosal, submucosal, muscle tunic, and the serosal layer. The main function of the crop is to hold food in storage until it can be released to the stomach or the proventriculus. The crop fills only after the proventriculus is full. Food can remain in the crop for up to 12 hours until it is transferred via peristaltic action. No actual digestion takes place in the crop, as there are no digestive chemicals secreted there to begin the process. However, softening and swelling of the feed will occur during the storage time. This can lead to a condition called sour crop, where the contents of the crop ferment and a bacterial yeast infection can occur. After the food leaves the crop via peristaltic action, it moves into the proventriculus. Also known as the true stomach, the proventriculus is where actual digestion begins. The walls of the proventriculus are thick and composed of 5 layers: a muscle layer, itself composed of 3 individual layers, a thick layer of glandular tissue, and the inner mucous membrane layer. The glandular tissue produces secretions which begin the process of digestion. These secretions include hydrochloric acid, which lowers the pH of the digestive system and food mixture, the enzyme pepsin, which helps break down protein, and the hormone gastrin, which stimulates gastric and pancreatic juice production. The acid and digestive enzymes in the proventriculus break down food more significantly than the enzymes secreted by the salivary glands. But at this point, the food has not yet been ground, only softened before it moves to the gizzard. The gizzard, or ventriculus, is the muscular stomach where the grinding of food takes place. After being softened by the proventriculus, food moves into the gizzard. It's a round organ with 2 lobes, one larger than the other. Each surface of the gizzard is covered by a shiny layer of tendinous tissue, which is thicker at the center and thinner out by the edges. Under this outer layer are located very powerful masses of red muscle. The inner surface is lined with a creamy-colored, thick, horny tissue raised in ridges. This surface acts as the bird's teeth and is made up of a strong keratinized material called koilin that is able to withstand the potentially damaging effects of the hydrochloric acid and pepsin coming from the proventriculus and the muscular action of grinding food. As the koilin wears down from the grinding action, glands in the gizzard produce more koilin that passes to the surface where it hardens to replace the worn tissue. Though the gizzard consists of very powerful muscles, it alone can't pulverize everything the typical feed. This mineral matter accumulates in the gizzard, and the particles help pulverize the seeds and grain. Once the food is ground, it passes into the small intestine. Feed passes from the gizzard into the small intestine, where digestion and absorption occur. The small intestine of a mature chicken is more than 4.5 feet in length and has 3 distinct areas: the duodenum, or the duodenal loop, where the pancreas lies in the center, the jejunum, and the ileum. Collectively, the jejunum and ileum are called the lower small intestine. As food leaves the gizzard and enters the duodenum, hormones are released which signal the pancreas to release digestive hormones and bicarbonate. This acts to dilute the hydrochloric acid from the proventriculus. The enzymes trypsin and chymotrypsin digest proteins. Amylase breaks down carbohydrates, and lipase breaks down fat. Insulin and glucagon, hormones that maintain blood glucose, are also produced in the pancreas. All these combine with bile from the gallbladder in the common bile duct to continue the digestive process. The saturated and ground up food mixture known as chyme moves through the jejunum and then through the nearly 4 feet of ileum, where most of the released nutrients are absorbed. Inside the small intestine, villi, flexible finger-like protrusions, line the inner wall, providing needed surface area for adequate absorption of nutrients like glucose, calcium, and vitamin B12, and remaining products of digestion not absorbed elsewhere. The large intestine, at 4 inches in length, is actually shorter than the small intestine. It runs in a nearly straight line below the vertebra and ends at the cloaca. Sometimes this section is referred to as the colon. The last of water reabsorption occurs in this organ, creating and storing undigested waste material that is eventually excreted through the cloaca. The ceca are 2 blind pouches located where the small and large intestines join. Some of the water remaining in the digested material is reabsorbed here. Additionally, any remaining coarse materials are broken down in the ceca through fermentation. During this fermentation process, the bacteria in the ceca produce several fatty acids, as well as the 8 B vitamins: thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, pantothenic acid, pyridoxine, biotin, folic acid, and vitamin B12. Because the ceca are located so close to the end of the digestive tract, however, few of those produced nutrients are absorbed and available to the chicken. The large intestine connects to the front part of the cloaca. This organ is a flexible cavity that represents the junction of the digestive and urinary tracts. In hens, the reproductive tract also joins at the cloaca. Here, digestive waste mixes with urinary waste and passes out of the body through the vent. The cloaca in chickens is also flexible enough to accommodate an egg passing through it from the reproductive system.
All right, so that would have been our dissection. I didn't have a chicken. I would have had a. I have a dove. No, not a dove. What is it? A pigeon. Yeah, it's a pigeon. But we would have looked very, very specifically at that digestive system because it's so much different than other things. My special thanks to North Carolina State University for that. I thought that was a pretty good. A good dissection there. Okay, students, well, remember we're spending 3 weeks on Module 16, so you won't have a quiz over this next week, but the next, all right? And then I'm still working out the whole final thing. And then next week we'll do mammals, and we'll have our owl palate dissection. And then the week after that we'll talk about human anatomy for 1 week, and then after that will be the final exam. All right, I hope everybody's well, doing great out there. Go get a little sunshine and enjoy your week. Okay, see you next week. Bye.